March 15th, 1981, 7:45 in the evening, 2117 Porter Street, South Philadelphia. Phil Testa is climbing the 3 concrete steps of his own front porch, keys in his left hand, a paper bag from the diner in his right. He is the boss of the Philadelphia crime family. He has held that title for exactly 10 months and 27 days. The bomb sitting under the porch contains roofing nails and dynamite. It is detonated by remote control from a parked car across the street. The blast rips through the wooden porch, shreds his lower body, and throws him backwards onto his own lawn. Nails embed themselves in the brick of the house next door. A neighbor later told investigators the sound was not like a gunshot. It was like the sky cracked open. Phil Testa bled out before the ambulance arrived. They called him the Chicken Man because he ran a poultry distribution business in the Italian market. Bruce Springsteen would later write a song about him. They blew up the Chicken Man in Philly last night. The man who inherited his seat was 5'5", about 140 pounds, with slick black hair and cold dark eyes. His name was Nicky Scarfo. They called him Little Nicky. And over the next 10 years, he would murder or order the murder of more than 30 people, including his own underboss, his own cousin, his own capos, and the son of the dead boss, whose chair he was now sitting in. He turned Philadelphia, which had been the sleepiest, most peaceful mafia family in America for 20 years, into a slaughterhouse. This is the story of how paranoia and ambition transformed a forgotten mob backwater into the bloodiest decade any American crime family ever endured. This is the story of the nail bombs, the machine gun ambushes, the underbosses strangled in furniture stores, the Halloween night shooting of the boss's own son, and the one witness nobody saw coming. The boss's own nephew, the youngest underboss in mob history, a man named Phil Leonetti, who walked into a federal courtroom, pointed at his uncle, and said 3 words that finished the Philadelphia mob. He did it. But here is what the Netflix documentary that dropped in October of 2025 only hints at. Scarfo did not become a killer because he was powerful. He became a killer because he was terrified. And the higher he climbed, the more terrified he got. By the end, he was murdering the men closest to him, the men who had killed for him, the men who had bled for him. Because in his mind, every one of them was thinking about taking his chair. That is the story. That is the pattern. That is why the whole thing collapsed in less than a decade. To understand how it happened, you have to go back to March of 1929, Brooklyn, New York. A boy named Nicky Scarfo was born to Italian immigrant parents. His father worked in a shoe factory. The family moved to South Philadelphia when Nicky was still a child. He grew up on the streets around Passyunk Avenue, a small kid, the smallest kid in every room, and he learned early that if he was going to get respect, he was going to have to take it violently. He boxed as a teenager. He was never good enough to turn pro, but he was good enough to hurt people who underestimated him. That became his whole philosophy. Hurt people who underestimate you. Hurt them first. Hurt them badly. His uncle, on his mother's side, was Nicholas Piccolo, a made member of the Philadelphia family. That was Nicky's way in. By his early 20s, he was running numbers and loan sharking in South Philly under the umbrella of the Bruno family. He was inducted as a made man sometime in the mid-1950s. The exact date has never been confirmed. What is documented is that by 1963, Nicky Scarfo had already killed a man. A longshoreman named Dugan, stabbed to death in a diner argument over who was next in line at the jukebox. Scarfo did 2 years for manslaughter. When he came out, Boss Angelo Bruno was furious. Killing a civilian over a jukebox was exactly the kind of thing Bruno hated, so Bruno exiled him. That exile turned out to be the luckiest thing that ever happened to Nicky Scarfo. Bruno sent him down to Atlantic City. In 1963, Atlantic City was a rotting seaside town with boarded-up boardwalks and empty hotels. Nobody wanted to be there. But Scarfo set up a small operation out of a white apartment building at 26 North Georgia Avenue, a section of town called Ducktown. He ran a piece of the local loan sharking. a piece of the cement trade. And he waited. He had nothing else to do but wait. Then, in 1976, New Jersey legalized casino gambling. Atlantic City, overnight, became the biggest construction boom on the East Coast. Billions of dollars in concrete, steel, union labor, garbage hauling, vending machines. And Nicky Scarfo was the only made man already there. He did not have to fight for the territory. The territory fell into his lap. By 1979, he was pulling in a documented minimum of $40,000 a week from Atlantic City extortion alone. Every union local, every cement contractor, every bartenders association paid tribute to little Nicky. He was still, officially, a soldier. But he was sitting on a gold mine. And back in Philadelphia, the other wise guys were starting to notice. Angelo Bruno was murdered on the night of March 21st, 1980. Shot once in the back of the head with a shotgun while sitting in the passenger seat of his own car, parked in front of his house on Snyder Avenue. He was 69 years old. He had run Philadelphia peacefully for 21 years, 2 decades without a single family war. That record ended the moment he slumped forward against the dashboard. The shooter was never officially identified, but the man who ordered it was. Antonio Caponigro, Bruno's own consigliere, a capo they called Tony Bananas. He had gone to New York first and gotten what he believed was permission from the Genovese family to do the hit. He had not. He had been set up. The commission had said nothing of the kind. And 28 days after Bruno died, Tony Caponigro was found stuffed in the trunk of a Cadillac in the South Bronx. $20 bills had been stuffed in his mouth and shoved up his rectum. A message. You killed for money you did not deserve. 3 of his co-conspirators were dead within 90 days. That is when Phil Testa became boss. And that is when Nicky Scarfo, sitting on his Atlantic City fortune, got promoted to consigliere. For the first time in his life, he had real power over made men. And for the first time, Philadelphia knew exactly how dangerous little Nicky could be. Then came the bomb on Porter Street. Phil Testa held the throne for less than a year. The men who blew him up, a capo named Pete Casella and another named Frank Chicky Narducci, believed they had approval from New York to take over. They did not. New York approved Scarfo. Both men were dead by January of 1982. Narducci was gunned down outside his home in South Philadelphia. 12 shots, a dozen of them at point-blank range. The shooter was Phil Testa's own son, Salvatore Testa, a 25-year-old capo who had watched his father get blown into pieces on his own porch. Salvi Testa was going to become one of the most important figures in this story. Remember his name. He was Scarfo's favorite. He was Scarfo's killer. And Scarfo was going to murder him, too. When Nicky Scarfo became boss in the spring of 1981, he was 52 years old. He had finally made it. He stood at the top of a family that controlled Philadelphia, South Jersey, Atlantic City, and parts of Delaware. The Atlantic City casino skim alone was bringing in more than $5 million a year. And his rules were simple. Nobody sells drugs without kicking up to him. Every soldier pays a street tax of 1/3 of everything they earn. Every non-made associate in his territory, every bookmaker, every loan shark, every numbers runner who was not in the family, pays Scarfo $2,000 a month in street tax, whether he did business with the family or not. If you did not pay, you were killed. If you paid late, you were killed. If Scarfo simply decided he did not like you, you were killed. He installed his own people everywhere. He named his nephew, Phil Leonetti, his underboss. Leonetti was 28 years old, the youngest underboss in the history of La Cosa Nostra. Nobody in New York had ever promoted a man that young to that position. But Leonetti was family. Nicky's sister Nancy's boy, raised almost like a son. Scarfo trusted him completely because Leonetti had already proved he would kill on command. He had murdered a contractor named Vincent Falcone in December of 1979. Shot him in the head in a basement in Margate, New Jersey, while Scarfo watched and laughed. Leonetti would later testify that his uncle kissed him on the cheek afterward and said, "I love this kid." Scarfo named Salvatore Chucky Merlino his underboss when the family expanded. Chucky was 43, a fireplug, a drinker, a man who had been with Scarfo since the 1960s. Scarfo named Salvi Testa a capo and gave him the 23rd and Passyunk crew, the most aggressive gunmen in the family. Everyone was in place. Everyone was loyal. Everyone was getting rich. And that was exactly the moment Nicky Scarfo started to come apart. You have to understand something about how paranoia works at that altitude. Scarfo had watched Angelo Bruno get killed by his own consigliere. He had watched Phil Testa get killed by his own capo. He had watched the men who killed Testa die within months. The lesson Scarfo took from all of it was not that loyalty was important. The lesson he took was that nobody could be trusted, ever. And the closer they were to you, the more dangerous they were. By 1983, he was seeing betrayal everywhere. In the way a capo ordered his coffee, in the way a soldier looked at his watch. In a joke told at the wrong moment, the body count started climbing. In October of 1981, a family associate named Frankie Flowers D'Alfonso was walking home from a corner store in South Philadelphia when two men with baseball bats came out of an alley and beat him nearly to death. They broke his jaw in 3 places. They broke both cheekbones. They crushed his ribs. He survived barely. His crime was ignoring a demand from Scarfo for a cut of his loan sharking business. That was the warning. The warning did not work. D'Alfonso kept doing business his own way. And on July 23, 1985, at 8:30 in the evening, he was walking home again, this time on Catherine Street, when 2 shooters with masks stepped out from around a parked car and opened fire. 5 shots to the chest, 2 to the head. He was dead before he hit the pavement. Scarfo had waited almost 4 years to finish that job. He never forgot. He never forgave. That was the entire operating principle of the regime. Here is where it gets interesting. Because Scarfo did not just kill enemies, he killed friends. And the pattern of who he killed tells you everything about the psychology of the man. Salvi Testa was 28 years old in September of 1984. He was handsome, 6 feet tall, well-built, engaged to marry Chucky Merlino's daughter. He had proven himself a dozen times over. He had killed Chicky Narducci to avenge his father. He had participated in the Pat Spirito hit in April of 1983, a capo who had been skimming. He had done the D'Alfonso beating. He was, by every metric, the most effective soldier Scarfo had. And then, for reasons that still are not fully understood, Salvi broke off his engagement to Chucky Merlino's daughter. Nobody knows exactly why. Some say she cheated on him. Some say he just changed his mind. What is documented is that Chucky Merlino was humiliated, and Chucky Merlino went to Nicky Scarfo and said the kid has to go. Scarfo agreed, not because he believed Merlino, because he had started to believe Salvi Testa was getting too powerful, too popular, too well-liked by the younger soldiers. In Scarfo's mind, a soldier who was loved more than the boss was already dangerous. He ordered the hit. He told his killers he wanted Salvi strangled, quietly, with a rope, so the body could be hidden. But Salvi Testa was a big kid, built like an athlete, and the men assigned to kill him, including his own best friend Joey Pungatori, knew they could not overpower him in a wrestling match. On September 14th, 1984, they lured him to a candy store in South Philadelphia owned by a family associate. Salvi sat down on a couch in the back room to watch a football game. A shooter walked up behind him and put 2 bullets in the back of his head. His body was rolled in a blanket, driven to a rural lot in Gloucester Township, New Jersey, and dumped beside a dirt road with his hands tied behind his back. A jogger found him the next morning. Salvi Testa had been Scarfo's favorite. He had been Leonetti's best friend, and Scarfo killed him because he was popular. That is the moment, if you ask Phil Leonetti today, that everything started to rot. Leonetti said later that he stopped sleeping. He would lay in bed and think about his cousin, Nicky Jr., who was 10 years old, and wonder what his uncle would do if Nicky Jr. ever disappointed him. He thought about his own mother. He thought about himself. He was the underboss. He was next in line, and he had just watched the boss murder the man who was next in line before him. But the killing was not over. It was accelerating. In 1982, Scarfo had been convicted of a federal weapons charge and served roughly 17 months in a federal prison in La Tuna, Texas. While he was away, Chucky Merlino ran the family as acting boss. And Chucky ran it sloppy. He drank. He talked. He made bad decisions. When Scarfo came home in 1984, he demoted Chucky from underboss and elevated Phil Leonetti in his place. Chucky took it. He had no choice. But Scarfo never forgot a slight, even a slight he had invented in his own head. A few years later, when Chucky caught a racketeering case, Scarfo did nothing to help him. When Chucky's younger brother Lawrence Yogi Merlino made statements that Scarfo considered disloyal, Scarfo tried to have him killed too. Yogi survived only by becoming a government witness. Here is a scheme that tells you everything about how the Scarfo money machine actually worked. The street tax. You have to understand the mechanics. In the early 1980s, Philadelphia had hundreds of independent bookmakers, loan sharks, numbers runners, and drug dealers. Most of them were not mob-affiliated. They had been operating for decades under Angelo Bruno with a hands-off policy. Bruno believed that squeezing civilians was bad business. Scarfo threw that policy in the garbage. The opportunity was simple. Every non-made earner in South Philadelphia and Atlantic City had a nice little business. Scarfo wanted his cut. The inside connection was Scarfo himself. Everybody knew who he was. Everybody knew what he would do if they said no. The execution was brutal. A capo would walk into the back room of a bookmaker's place, sit down, order a coffee, and say the number. $2,000 a month, sometimes more, sometimes a flat percentage. Late payment meant a beating. A second late payment meant a shooting. The money came in cash, collected weekly, counted in a social club on Kamek Street in South Philadelphia. The profit worked out to roughly $150,000 a month at peak pure cash, no books, distributed through the family pyramid. Scarfo personally took the largest share. The problem was that the street tax created hundreds of witnesses. Every single one of those extorted earners became a potential federal witness. When the FBI finally got serious in 1987, half of them lined up at the U.S. Attorney's door. They had been waiting years. There is one more piece of the Scarfo machine you have to understand: the drug money. Officially, the American Mafia had a no-narcotics rule going back to 1948. Officially, Scarfo enforced it. In reality, he did nothing of the kind. He let his capos and his soldiers deal methamphetamine and cocaine throughout Philadelphia and South Jersey, as long as they kicked up the tax. The Pat Spirito killing in April of 1983 was officially about disloyalty. Unofficially, Spirito had been selling meth and not paying Scarfo the right percentage. That was the actual crime. Another capo, Salvatore Sammy Tamburino, was murdered in October of 1983 for the same reason. Scarfo was running a meth tax, a coke tax, a bookmaking tax, a loan sharking tax, and a general tax on breathing air in South Philly. And it was generating more money than the family had ever seen. Millions a year. Personally delivered to him, in cash, every week, at 26 North Georgia Avenue in Atlantic City. But here is what the money bought him: enemies he did not know he had. Every soldier resented the cut. Every capo resented Phil Testa getting killed for nothing. Every wife in South Philadelphia whose husband came home beaten or bleeding started pushing her husband to get out. By 1986, a low-level soldier named Nicky Caramandi was arrested on a shakedown attempt of a building inspector, and when the FBI offered him a deal, he took it immediately. He became the first made member of the Philadelphia family to cooperate. Then came Thomas Del Giorno, a capo, who turned a few months later. Then another, then another. On November 17, 1988, After a 4-month trial in a federal courtroom in Philadelphia, Nicky Scarfo was convicted of racketeering and racketeering conspiracy under the RICO Act. The charges included 8 murders, 4 attempted murders, extortion, drug trafficking, gambling, and loan sharking. 16 of his associates were convicted with him. The primary witnesses against him were Caramondi, Del Giorno, and a half-dozen of Scarfo's own extortion victims. He was sentenced to 55 years in federal prison. A separate state conviction added life without parole. Scarfo was 59 years old. He was never going to breathe free air again. But that was not even the crazy part. The crazy part came a year later, and it came from his own son. Nicky Scarfo Jr. was 23 years old on October 31st, 1989. Halloween night, South Philadelphia. He was sitting at a table in Dante and Luigi's restaurant at 10th and Catherine Streets, eating spaghetti and clams with 2 friends. His father was already in federal prison, already convicted, already finished. But Junior was a target anyway. Because with Scarfo Sr. gone, the remnants of the family, now being run by a capo named John Stanfa in an uneasy arrangement with the rising Merlino faction, were purging anyone loyal to the old regime. Junior was the son of the former boss. That was enough. At 8:15 in the evening, a man in a yellow Halloween trick-or-treat mask walked into the restaurant carrying a Halloween candy bag. He pulled a MAC-10 machine pistol out of the bag. He walked up behind Scarfo Jr. He opened fire. He fired until the gun was empty. Roughly 15 rounds went into Scarfo Jr. at point-blank range. 8 rounds hit him, in the neck, in the arms, in the torso. Not one bullet hit a vital organ. Not one. The shooter turned and ran out of the restaurant, jumped into a waiting car, and disappeared. Scarfo Jr. was rushed to Hahnemann Hospital. He survived. 9 days later, he walked out of the hospital under his own power. He had been shot 8 times at a range of under 6 feet with a fully automatic weapon, and he had walked away. That kind of luck is not normal. In Mafia terms, it is the kind of luck that makes people think you are protected. The man who fired the gun has never been officially identified. For decades, street talk has pointed at a rising young mobster from the Merlino faction, whose father was Chucky. That was Joseph Joey Merlino, the kid of the underboss Scarfo had humiliated and tried to kill. Merlino has always denied involvement. No charges were ever filed against anyone for the Dante and Luigi's shooting. Junior himself later refused to cooperate with the investigation. And now we come to the twist that finished the whole family. Because while Nicky Jr. was recovering in a hospital bed, his cousin Phil Leonetti, the youngest underboss in Mafia history, Scarfo's own nephew, was sitting in a federal prison cell in Kentucky doing the math. He had been sentenced to 45 years. He was 36 years old. If he served every day, he would come out at 81. His son, little Philip, was 8 years old. Leonetti would never know him. He would die in prison. And for what? For an uncle who had murdered his best friend Phil Testa over a broken engagement. For an uncle who had murdered dozens of men for sins that were, when you looked at them straight, no sins at all. On June 12, 1989, Phil Leonetti told his lawyer he wanted to meet with the FBI. It took several months to arrange. But by the spring of 1990, he was officially a cooperating witness. The youngest underboss in American Mafia history became the highest-ranking member of La Cosa Nostra ever to turn government witness up to that point. What he gave the FBI was catastrophic. 10 murders he had personally been involved in, every detail of the Scarfo financial structure, the street tax system, the drug tolerance policy, the murder of Salvatore Testa, step by step, from planning to burial, the murder of Vincent Falcone, the murder of Pat Spirito, the attempted murders of Harry Riccobene and his brother Mario during the so-called Riccobene War of 1982 and 83. Leonetti testified at more than a dozen trials up and down the East Coast. He testified against his own uncle. He testified against John Gotti. He testified against Vincent Chin Gigante. He testified against Philadelphia capos, New York capos, New Jersey capos. His cooperation gutted not just his own family, but contributed to convictions in 4 other Cosa Nostra families. In May of 1992, a federal judge reduced his original 45-year sentence to 5 years, 5 months, and 5 days. He walked out of witness protection a free man. The number was a message to the street. 555. He never served a full decade. Nicky Scarfo died in federal custody on January 13, 2017, at the Federal Medical Center in Butner, North Carolina. He was 87 years old, reportedly of cancer. He had been behind bars for 29 years. By the end, he weighed around 110 pounds and was nearly blind. He had outlived most of the men he had murdered, and most of the men who had testified against him. He had never admitted to a single killing. He had never expressed a single regret. He had never spoken to his nephew, Phil Leonetti, again, although Leonetti sent a message once through an intermediary saying that he was sorry things had to end this way. Scarfo's response, according to one account, was 3 words: "Tell him nothing." His son, Nicky Jr., who had survived the Halloween hit at Dante and Luigi's, made his own run at the life. In 2014, he was convicted of financial fraud in a New Jersey scheme involving a publicly traded company called First Plus. The charge was essentially a mob takeover of a mortgage firm. He was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison. He is currently in custody. The Scarfo bloodline, as a mob power, ends with him. Chucky Merlino, the underboss Scarfo demoted, was convicted with his boss in 1988 and died in federal prison on October 22, 2012. His brother Yogi served his cooperation time and disappeared into witness protection. Joey Merlino, the rising young street boss during the Halloween shooting, went on to lead the Philadelphia family through the 1990s and beyond. He has been in and out of federal prison ever since. Convicted of racketeering in 2001, released, convicted again of a gambling conspiracy in 2018. He is currently the most famous face of the modern Philadelphia mob, featured prominently in the Netflix 3-part documentary that premiered in October of 2025, titled Mob War. Philadelphia versus the Mafia. That documentary is the reason you are probably hearing about this story again, almost 40 years after the slaughter. Phil Leonetti came out of witness protection around 2012. He wrote a book called Mafia Prince. He gave television interviews. He admitted, on camera, to 10 murders. He expressed remorse. He said the worst thing he had ever done was the murder of Vincent Falcone in 1979, because Falcone was a civilian who had done nothing wrong. He said the killing of Phil Testa still kept him up at night. He is in his 70s now. He lives under an assumed name. He has not returned to Atlantic City or to Philadelphia, not once. He believes, probably correctly, that there are still men in South Philly who would kill him on sight. Here is what the Nicky Scarfo era actually proves. It proves that violence and power are not the same thing. Angelo Bruno ran Philadelphia peacefully for 21 years and died a wealthy man, surrounded by a family that, while it mourned, was not destroyed. Scarfo ran it violently for 10 years, and the family was shattered by the time he left the streets. 30-plus murders, 17 convictions in a single trial. 3 of his closest men turned cooperator. His own nephew, the underboss, turned cooperator. His own son became a convict in his own right. And the organization Scarfo built, the machine of street taxes and drug percentages and social club cash counts, collapsed within 2 years of his imprisonment and has never recovered the authority it once had. The real lesson of Nicky Scarfo is not that he was evil. Plenty of mob bosses were evil. The real lesson is that he confused fear with loyalty. He believed that if every man around him was afraid, every man around him would obey. But fear is not a binding agent. Fear is an accelerant. Fear makes men calculate. Fear makes men count the years and the odds and the promises they made to their children. Fear made Phil Leonetti walk into the U.S. Attorney's office in 1989. Fear made Nicky Caramondi flip the moment he was arrested. Fear made an entire generation of Philadelphia wise guys decide that sitting at a defense table with little Nicky Scarfo was a worse fate than sitting at a prosecution table without him. Nicky Scarfo spent 10 years murdering the men he could not trust. In the end, every single one of them he did not murder turned around and murdered him with a courtroom oath instead. That is the real story of the Philadelphia mob war. Not the nail bombs, not the machine gun in the Halloween candy bag, not the bodies in the trunks and the candy store back rooms. The real story is that paranoia is not a strategy. It is a suicide mechanism. And the tighter Nicky Scarfo closed his fist around his own family, the faster his own family slipped through his fingers. If this story gripped you, hit subscribe. We drop a new mob documentary every week. Untold history from the world of organized crime. Drop a comment below. Do you think Phil Leonetti was a rat? Or a man who did what he had to do to survive his own uncle? We read every response. Until next time.